All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am so glad to have Ian Gartz on this LinkedIn Live with us. Ian has been a remarkable thinker and someone I deeply admire, uh, not only for his thinking, but also for the sort of interesting analogies he used, which is, I think, a very British trait. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ian to maybe just speak, a little bit about himself and elements, and then we can go forward from there.
So, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Delighted to be here. I've been around the Salesforce ecosystem probably 25 years. I think I presented at the first ever London event where there were 3 customers. We were one of them. There was Mark and 120 customers, or 120 people in the room. So it was been here from the very early days. So I'm very excited to see sort of the transition of Salesforce. But I think the most important thing is I've never seen anything which is changing or transforming the ecosystem as much as Agentforce, which is why I think this is so important. So I've been a customer for 25 years with Elements, nearly 10 years, where we're an ISV, a software vendor, around helping people understand how their org works, but also helping them build agents. So we've got quite a lot of hands-on experience around Agentforce as well. So for those people who are going, it doesn't work, that's just not true. We've got it working. However, there are some challenges in terms of getting it to work properly and reliably, and I think that's part of the conversation today.
True. So, Ian, let's kind of dive right into just AI in general, and particularly for Salesforce customers. What challenges are you seeing? What's the thinking on the other side based on your experience?
I mean, it's massively transformational, and therefore I think some organizations who are very risk averse are sitting on the sidelines and going, maybe not yet. I think the problem, though, is things are evolving so quickly. People are going, at what point do we get started? When is it going to stabilize? And I don't think it is. So I think you've got people who are not necessarily leaning in. I mean, the data out there says everyone is using AI, but that might just be from a personal perspective using Gemini or ChatGPT to ask questions. And that's very different from having AI embedded in workflows, agents actually supporting work. So I think you've got at one end, you've got people going, I'm not sure we should be doing this, it's all too high risk. At the other end, you've got people have got experience, are using it and are seeing massive benefits. And it almost feels like it's polarizing at the moment. So those people who have spent enough time trialing it, experimenting, and are now into business as usual. And there are a lot of people who are still at the experimentation phase, and we need to get people from that phase into business as usual and getting the benefits from it. So it's very much spread. But the benefits that people are getting who are using it properly are enormous. And I think those people are now accelerating away from those people who are still looking on the sidelines.
True. And I think it's also sort of interesting from a trend perspective. On one hand, you have larger enterprises, regulated sector customers who are very much on the fence on like, hey, this is all interesting, but we are not sure. And rightfully so. They have deeper obligations in terms of security, governance, privacy, compliance, information, infosec policies, etc. Right? And then on the other hand, you're also looking at organizations, large as well as small, where people are going, well, this is great. Look what I can do with ChatGPT or Claude. For $20, I have this incredible capability that I can really benefit from. And you constantly see this dichotomy of larger, very well funded enterprises who have no dearth of money or technology or talent, still kind of struggling to bring AI into their mainstream day to day. While there are some outliers and sort of the early adapters, if you will, on the large enterprise side. But then you see small and medium enterprise where the scene may be slightly different. Do you see that kind of a trend as well?
No, I need to disagree with you on that for a couple of reasons. As ever. So one is, I think, if you want to build agents, so let's not worry about, I mean, could I use ChatGPT to answer some questions? But if I want to make it do some real work, as in transformational work, so like take all the account information, look at all the open opportunities, open cases, summarize it, and then prioritize which accounts I should look at first, That's real work. That requires us to have reasonably well understood business processes, so we understand how that works. It needs sort of good data governance. It requires a good understanding about how our applications work. I think the large regulated organizations are in great shape. That they have to understand their business processes. They have to have good data governance just because they're regulated. So what we're actually seeing is some of the large, highly regulated industries like life sciences, food, pharma, financial services are actually the people who are best positioned to start to use AI. Now, I'll balance that with they're not going to be using it everywhere. You're not going to see it sitting on customer-facing websites. They're picking their use cases carefully because, as you said, security, compliance, all those risks. But they're actually in better shape than maybe some of the small, medium enterprises, or those who are trying to look at, say, just front office processes which are not very well defined. So this is as much an implementation issue as a technology issue. And in fact, I was listening to 20VC, which is an amazing podcast. It's sort of investors talking about the market. So Jason Lemkin, Rory O'Driscoll from Scale, and Harry Stebbings. So it's called 20VC. And the most recent one they were talking about, which is people have underestimated the business change, the business transformation lift they need to go through to be able to make agents work. And I think that's where small, medium enterprise, they don't have spare capacity to do that. Whilst if you're a large enterprise, you can take a team and go, right, make this work. So I think just to say large enterprises don't do it, small do, I don't think that's right. But also when you look at those enterprises, it might be, here is an area which is entrepreneurial inside a large enterprise. They've got well-defined processes, good data governance, and they can spin up a team and start to prove things. So I've been really surprised about some of those more regulated who genuinely are doing quite a lot. And then at small, medium, it depends on the appetite of maybe the founder or the CIO in terms of what they're doing.
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to that. So I should probably qualify this a little bit more. So for sure, there are outliers, right? There are organizations, early adapters in FinServ, in regulated sector, health insurance. One of our early customer is a financial services company. It's a multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500, very famous name and all that, right? Doing exactly what you described, an account 360 with GPT-5. They're pulling opportunity data for an account, cases, kind of trying to figure out renewal potential. It's a huge renewal business that they are in. And when you think about organizations like these, they have been very instrumental in moving forward. Then you have wide swath of very large organizations, particularly healthcare, health insurance, some of these areas where you have an AI COE, you have a whole apparatus for very good reasons.
Yes.
But for them to bring a new technology in, particularly with Gen AI, and kind of dot the I's and cross the T's, is at least a 6 to 10 month time frame, right? So, and for very, very well, good reasons. I'm glad they take that kind of due diligence, but that's kind of also the constraint that for them to bring it in and to enable AI is not as simple as like for somebody else that does not have that many checks and balances.
No, of course. But that also means they need to get started now. They can't be sitting and going, well, actually in 6 months' time, this will be the right answer in another 2 years' time. So, I mean, you talked about early adopters a couple of times. There's for those who are old enough, there was the book Crossing the Chasm, which was the seminal work on like how technology buyers work. And left of the chasm is early adopters. They're the evangelists. They can see a business benefit, but there isn't a market leader. So you've got to take a risk in terms of the technology buy, its experimentation. Right of the chasm is the established buyers. There is a market leader. You choose the market leader. And the thing is that those two buyers are actually dramatically different in terms of the way they buy. Or agents and AI are definitely to the left of the chasm. So again, it's back to, are there evangelical teams inside large organizations, or is the CIO an evangelist and leaning in and going, I'm happy to start experimenting using it, even if I'm not going to purchase the market leader. The market leader hasn't been established yet. That's why it's to the left of the chasm. So I think that's the other thing when you're talking about different organizations. Are they happy to be early adopters? And it doesn't have to be the whole company. It could be we spin a team off, and
Correct.
that team's the early adopters. And it's led by someone who is evangelical about it, who can see the benefits, and it might be an individual leading that team. So I think that's why it feels like there's no consistent pattern as we look across organizations.
True. And it's an interesting time because I also think it's the transition, right? We are moving from early adapter to early majority
Yes.
because last year was so much more of education. Like most customers I spoke with were like still trying to figure out. They have a lot of internal pressure to do something with AI, but they were
Yes.
still trying to figure out what are good use cases. But this year, and as I see it going into the next few quarters, there seems to be a lot of interest in, like, we have figured out quite a few things. Sure, to your point around processes and data quality, like all the foundational stuff, they either have some of it, all of it, or are in the process of bringing it all together. But the winds are much more favorable now than they were maybe even 8, 9, 10 months ago, in terms of organizations going, all right, we get it, we understand the value. Yes, there are adoption challenges, yes, there are foundational challenges, but there is a strong desire to move forward. Are you seeing that?
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. I think back to like you end up with a couple of leaders and they put out like here's some use cases we're using, and then that inspires other people to go, okay, well that's a use case that works for me. So I think there was a big gap at the beginning of people going, what should I use this for? And it's quite staggering to go, well, kind of, isn't it obvious? But again, if you've not been experimenting, you're not necessarily thinking about that. So a couple of things. One is, I think there are more use cases out there. Certainly, we've ended up building a little agent that sits on top of a business process, and it identifies and writes a business case for a use case for an agent. It will look at the boxes and go, okay, there's an agent there, there's an agent there, an agent there. I mean, it's not difficult to do, but I think it's opened people's minds to what's possible. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, certainly in the Agentforce world, I think a lot of the use cases were it's on a customer-facing website and it realizes you want to return a sweater and it finds another one. Quite complicated and visionary type use cases. And those are the ones that I think people went, that's fine, stop. I'm not ready for that. So I've been talking on the speaking circuit about you need to pick things which not based on complexity, but based on deployment risk. You want low deployment risk, high return on investment. So let me pick it like a low complexity, low deployment risk is, can we put our expenses policy online for our employees to work out? I know I'm about to fly to the UK. I'm this level of seniority. What sort of ticket can I buy? Stuff that people can get access to, onboarding, frequently asked questions, stuff around, I know, IT. So that's a really easy, low complexity, low deployment risk, easy use case. And then you can, so again, think about employees first, then maybe partners, then don't get to customers yet and prospects and your competitors, stay low. But you can create some quite high complexity, low deployment risk. So one example is, I know, a sales coach. So it looks at all your recordings with customers, and your reps can then use that recording to essentially role play that call that they did with them and improve. So actually, that's quite a complex use case and quite a complex agent, but it's very low deployment risk because it's aimed at just your employees. So I think people are now starting to get that in their minds about, okay, where to look for use cases to get going. Sorry, that's a very long answer to a short question, but that's actually what we're now seeing.
I would agree. I think, again, back to like regulated sector, that's like a perfect use case, right? Like, start with the internal audience where you have a lot of control. And also because it gives you an opportunity to solicit feedback, to
Yes.
deal with the change management. Like, the minute you want to go down this path, the number one thing you run into is, oh, do I even have the right kind of content? Just the amount of effort to harvest this content from a myriad of places sitting in your SharePoint, and a bunch of internal blogs and some PDF policies and some HR portal, and to just bring it all together, test it a bit, and make sure that it works the way you would want it to, is really good learning experience that you can then apply as you extend to partners and in future to customers.
Yeah.
Ironically though, I've also seen the flip side of this. Like, one of our customers is a very large ed tech company, and their number one use case was to make sure that they're able to inform the their students or their customer, if you will,
Yes.
right? And they now have a Einstein chatbot with GPT-5 deployed in like 18 languages in 22 countries.
Wow.
Very exceptional, because you're talking about a CIO who's extremely visionary and has a fair bit of risk tolerance to new technology, willing to innovate and try things out. But outside of cases like that, I kind of agree with you that most companies are like, oh, hold on, I don't know if I'm ready to push this out in the in the open and have like my company show up on New York Times because somebody bought a Chevy for $1.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at Elements, we've got all our support articles and all I say support articles. It's broader than that. There are, I mean, there are like thousands of bits of content, but we've got a AI sitting in front of that. We use Intercom. We used Intercom before Agentforce existed. I guess if we hadn't done that, we would have gone with Agentforce maybe. But we are last month 90.1% of all inquiries into that get responded to, and the customer said at the end, yes, I'm happy with the answer. Not just it got escalated, but they actually were happy with the answer. So the balance, and that number's been climbing over time. What's interesting is for those people who they haven't got their question answered, obviously that then gets forwarded to one of our support team. But the support team have got an agent that then looks at the question, looks at the support articles, and then writes the support article that was needed. They then get to modify it, change it, but then they put it back into the overall database, which is why it's gone to 70% all the way up to 90%, and it continues to climb. But again, very narrow use case. Like anybody can go and look at it, and competitors, prospects, customers. But again, it's not help me with my pricing. It's I've got a problem, or I want to do something with the product. How do I do it? What functionality would I use? And we spent quite a lot of effort making sure that those articles were written for AI. So if you think about AI, is not very good at nuance. It's not very good at so we spent quite a lot of effort making sure we had written those articles well, and there was no ambiguity, so therefore the agent wasn't giving confusing answers. And again, there's that feedback loop. Customer goes, oh, that's really confusing. We need to fix that really quickly. Make sure that article gets updated so that we're constantly improving it. But again, narrow use case, tons of value. But we had a good process around how to create it, update it, maintain it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the crucial areas, is to have like a closed loop around these things, because we actually built a lot of stuff in our product along those lines. So when you get a response, and you can offer feedback, and we'll ask more questions. Like, you'll pop up a form and say, if you said thumbs down, why? Like, was the response inaccurate? Was it not what you were expecting? Or like a free text box where somebody could respond,
Yes.
apply, and that feedback aggregates back to the product owner. Because I think that is fundamentally one of the most important pieces as businesses, kind of venture into it, and as we get our feet wet. We're trying to figure out, does this thing work well all the time? Because a feature of Gen AI is that it is not deterministic, right? You may get different answers, but you're trying to make sure it's still within the guardrails of what is considered acceptable.
Okay, so can I pick up on that for a moment? Because people go, how do you test AI? And I don't think you can. And people are like, well, what do you mean you can't test it? Okay, think of an agent as this really bright employee you've just hired. Okay, you can't test an employee. You can evaluate and say how good they are at doing things based on the different roles that you want them to do. So if they are brand new, they don't really understand the context of the company very well, you're not going to go, here's the phone, start calling customers. You're going to narrow the scope down and then evaluate them, and over time they get better. Or if they're not getting better, how do you train them? So I think it's very useful to think about sort of the employee life cycle. So you write a job spec, you train them, you onboard them, you then monitor them against some metrics, you then provide feedback, and then they either retire, they're made redundant, or they're a reduction in force, or you promote them. So if you think about all of those activities, they all need to happen in the agent world. And then you've got some other things sort of in the middle, which are, I know, they call in sick. Okay. So they have a big weekend, Monday's a bit rough, they don't come in on Monday. So what's the agent equivalent of that? Well, for some reason, the agent breaks. It's calling a workflow, and that workflow no longer works. Or it's calling an MCP, and that MCP server's down. So what's the fallback? So we're doing a lot of time planning for the honeymoon. We're not planning for the divorce. So it's like that person calls in sick. Great. So in the real world, you go, well, actually, Pete's called in sick, but it's all right. We've got 5 other support team, or that's a really important job. So could you go and do that? Well, what's the agent equivalent? And if that agent's doing something that a human can't even do because it requires reading 10,000 pages, okay, how important is that? So I think we need to think a little bit beyond, can we create it? So there's called in sick. The other one is, I know, someone has a fight with a coworker. What's the agent equivalent? Well, we've got 2 agents that are in conflict, or they're so until we start building a good understanding about agent capabilities and the conflicts and the metadata analysis, we may not spot that. What else we got? Favoritism. Right. So Ham, that guy's always giving his friend all the best deals. So again, our agents, because of the way they're trained, actually have got some biases. And then how do you pick those up? So I think it's really interesting if you think about sort of how we manage humans. We've got to try and replicate that, lean into the power of agents, but also make sure we mitigate against the risk of what agents do.
So that's an interesting topic. We should probably this is a conversation in itself, like the whole, just how do you add more quality in there, and how do you bring appropriateness in an agent, right? So in a lot of ways, again, the engineer in me thinks this is like a classic engineering problem, right? You've done these with flows, you've done these with pretty much any kind of process that you would write for before you start automating, and you're like, how would I do exception handling? What happens when it has faults? Like all of those things. So we need to, and I think a lot of people are borrowing very heavily from the classic software engineering principles.
Yes.
So that is definitely there. The other part, because what you just said, we had to firsthand deal with this the sort of use case of end customers reaching out and talking to a chatbot in an Einstein chatbot embedded app, Meow app, which is what our customer uses. We were, more than them, we were worried about what happens if this thing does not answer correctly, right? And how do you test that at scale?
Yes.
So about 2 years ago, when we actually deployed this, we basically created automation around it. So if you had, let's say, 1,000 question and answers, right? You have 1,000 FAQs. We'll generate like 6 variations of it. So now you have 6,000 variations of the question, right? And you're giving that, you're automating it, because like Einstein has an API. So you can call that chatbot programmatically, and you keep asking the same question, the same set, 6,000 questions. So it's the same question asked 6 different ways. You get answers. And then you take the question, you take the answer that the bot gave you, / the RAG gave you. And then you take the control, right, which is the answer that you were expecting. And you send all this to a different LLM.
Yeah.
And you have this criteria of 6 different things around accuracy, precision, appropriateness, brand, voice, things like that. And you ask it like, hey, based on these, score the response. And, internally we were like, we want at least a 97% accuracy. And once you've done that, so this is the fully automated version. Once you've done that, then you still have like human in the loop, that you have people who are manually testing and making sure this works as well. I actually don't think, no matter how much technology exists, at least today, I think there is no substitute to that. You want subject matter expert, your internal people, to see if it feels like an extension of their brand and what they want to deliver to their customers.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. we are, because of the scale issue, we're entering a whole new world of how this works. I think your example is great because it's thinking about, here's a body of data, here are the answers. So very much the sort of the FAQ, which I think is where we're seeing lots of the agents at the moment. But when you start getting to agents which are doing more, they're doing more steps in terms of what they're doing. It's not just here's a database, come out with the answers. We've got another issue as well, which is if you really haven't thought through sort of the overall process about what you want the agent to do, you end up introducing errors because it actually is getting confused about where it's going. Now, there'll be people on this call going, but if you're thinking about a process, you're just building a workflow. We're not. So think of an overall process, which is let's take one of the example you talked about, which is can you look at an account, look at all the open opportunities, look at all the open cases, go and look at the website of the customer and see if there's any recent news, then take that and look at what the risk is of them renewing, and then write the email. So there's multiple steps along the way there. That's not necessarily a workflow, because you might actually have it might be conversational along the way, which is it. Then you come back to the sales rep to ask some questions, and it works its way along. That has got multiple steps in it.
Yes.
But don't think of that process as being workflow. It does box 1, then it does box 2, it does box 4, box 5. Because what's happening is when you're having the conversation as the user with the agent, every time the agent's looking at basically the instructions that got generated off that and going, where am I in that? Okay, based on what I've just heard, I think I'm at box 4, so therefore I'm going to do what box 4 is. Because as a user, you might come back and go, oh, actually, can you find me another account? At which point, then the discussion is, oh no, we're back at box 1. So yes, you've got sort of an overall flow that you want the agent to go through, but because it's an agent, every utterance is evaluating all of the different places and working out where it is. So if you think about that diagram, that's a very easy way to understand, have I introduced errors because A, the logic's not right, or B, I've got 2 or 3 different inputs which are identical inputs going into boxes. So the agent looks and goes, well, I've got 3 different things I could do. Which one do you want me to do? And if you're simply writing instructions in text, it's very easy over time to get those conflicts or those gaps. And we're finding it's a lot easier if you've got a diagram, because you can then collaborate with people and go, is this what you want the thing to do? And they're like, yeah. Or no, that's not what I meant. You misinterpreted that. And then that diagram automatically generates the instructions. So you've then got some audit trail. So I think this diagramming approach, and it doesn't have to be elements, you could diagram in anything. But the point is that idea of collaborating on what the process looks like and then using it to generate the instructions gives you a level of reliability we're not seeing if you just simply type instructions in. And I think once you get into more complex use cases, you're going to have to do something like that. This idea of design canvas, call it what you want, or agent builder. That there's this design and architecture piece that I think we're rapidly getting into. And then as you get more complex agents, which are calling other agents, you then need to think about how you architect the agents. So we're moving rapidly from, can we do essentially a frequently asked questions into things more complicated, and suddenly we need to draw on, as you say, the software engineering skills of architect, design before we start building.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I kind of see these as like 2 separate almost levels, right? You have the whole sort of, let me visualize, let's kind of coalesce around what the business process needs to be. Like, how do we think about this? How do we think about user experience, right?
Yes.
Start maybe with user experience, then talk about the underlying process, then you talk about the underlying automation, workflow, process, and like whatever those things are that will go do stuff for me. That may be 1 or more agents. That may not be an agent. I may just be doing AI-based automation today. I'm not there with agents, right? Depending on the level of maturity with AI of an organization, right? But when you think about these multiple levels, then it starts to become more evident of which level am I trying to solve this problem at?
Yeah.
And like the example I gave with chatbot is you're right. It's a very sort of simple. It's a ping pong. Like, hey, what about this? What about that? Right? Like I'm just kind of ping ponging an agent. But if you go look at something more complex, for example, I know we briefly talked before this call about CPQ, right? We are doing a lot of work with integrating CPQ. That is a much more complex interaction where you're trying to create a quote, you're trying to add, quote line items, which could be simple products, which could be bundles, and a bundle could have a sub bundle in it, right? There's a lot of complexity. And even if before you get to all that, my I have 5,000 SKUs, right? I have 5,000 items. My rep can't remember the name of every SKU. Like they may just say, hey, I'm talking to a customer that wants this, and this. At a very high level, here is the requirement. Now come and give me a recommendation of what do we have that will meet those things, right? And then let me configure it, right? So there is a lot of nuance, back to your point, of these sort of more complex multi-turn agentic flows that are getting created. And again, what I'm seeing is it boils down to those couple of things. One, which you very rightly said, and I love that, is the whole visualization. Again, I know Elements does a great job there. I'm sure there are other tools. Again, it's just a tool, but the point is it's super important to have that level of understanding of what's the user experience, what's the underlying process, then what are the components, right, which you can enable with GPT-5, with Agentforce, with Microsoft Copilot Studio, with, I don't know, homegrown code that you vibe coded yourself. But whatever option you're taking, that's sort of where how I see this. Do you have a perspective on how you visualized all of this?
Okay, so I think they're taking your two levels. We created a concept called an agent interaction map, which is kind of, there are agents and sub-agents. So in the Salesforce world, it's like an agent is an agent and a sub-agent is a topic. If you're in the ServiceNow world, the top level I think is called agent orchestrator, and the next level down is agent. But you've got the concept of, there's not one agent, it might be an overall one which is calling different things. And that architecture bit is really important, because how you split out that sort of sub-agent level, the scope of that is really important. If you make the sub-agent too big, it gets confused. If you make it too granular, so there's quite a lot of thinking about the architecture there. So there's this agent interaction map, and I think as we start, say, calling third parties, so there's GPT-5 could be called by Agentforce. There could be an MCP. So there are lots of things. You need that sort of architecture, which is what we call the agent interaction map. So you can start to go, okay, what have I got? How does it fit together? And I think that needs to be combined with some view of an agent directory, because it's great when you've got one, but surely if someone comes up with a use case and goes, I'd like you to do that, don't just start building it. The first question is, have we already got one? Or have we got a sub-agent that we could call? So there's this reuse piece. So you wouldn't just go, okay, back to the real world. You wouldn't go, we need someone to go and go through a spreadsheet and build us a list of all potential partners. We should hire somebody. Well, no. You go, okay, who could we use who's already got those skills, who could go and do that for us? So in the real world, we don't just hire a new person. In the agent world, you might go, is there already an MCP server, an existing sub-agent? So that's the top level. And then we've got this idea of an agent interaction diagram, which is that visualization of how the agent works. And I think at that level, that then determines, okay, where am I going to get the data from? Have I even got the data? If I've aggregated all this data together, are the security levels so high I shouldn't be doing this? Do I have a workflow that I need to call, or do I have to go and build it, or what do I do? So at that level, you're then having the discussions about, okay, how actually are we going to make this agent work? And at that point, you can also then do the ROI, which says, actually, because of the complexity of doing this, there isn't a big enough ROI yet. There are better places we could deploy our resources. And I think, again, software engineering, you don't just go, architect, design, start building. You have steps where you go, is this still valid? Is this the best use of our time and resources? Can we even do this? So I think that's that level of architect with an agent interaction map, design with this sort of agent instruction diagram. And then you start getting into whether it's Agent Builder in Salesforce or GPT-5 or whatever else you're using to go and build the agent and then execute on it. And then we've got to go around the loop again, as we said earlier, which is how are we monitoring that? And if it's not working, let's go back to either the interaction, the instruction diagram and change that, or go back to the interaction map and go, oh no, we've architected this badly because, so those diagrams aren't just create and throw away. They are ongoing resources to help you understand how to do this. So I think this is exciting, but it's way more complicated than just building applications. We've got so many more moving parts.
You know, the engineer in me kind of looks at this, and I can see so many similarities. It's not identical, but so many similarities with how we did service-oriented architecture a while back, right? There were fine-grained and coarse-grained services, which is back to, what's the scope of an agent? What is the ideal, sort of level at which I want to build these things? Again, that will depend on business, ROI, data, security, authorization, authentication, like a whole slew of things, right?
Yeah.
The other aspect that's very interesting is, like A2A, which is agent-to-agent protocol, and we're doing a lot of work on it for our next release, addresses a lot of what you described, right? Interoperability, the possibility that what you're building, especially in a large enterprise, somebody may have already built, right? I was talking with, I think, Vasu a while back, and we were talking about how it's not a winner takes all world, right? I don't think any large enterprise is going to have just Agentforce or just GPT-5 or just Copilot Studio or just SAP, Jules, whatever they call their thing, right? They will probably have at least a couple of them, mostly because they have a lot of strategic vendors, right? And as they're building all of this, the interoperability, particularly to span enterprise-wide processes, is super important. And A2A addresses part of that. And again, to your point, like how in the web services SOA world, we used to have UDDI and other sort of web service directories. You'll start to see with A2A that it will become that directory. And I think tools like MuleSoft and Boomi and others are racing to be there so that they can be the API management layer, the APM layer for it, and kind of act as the registry for agents, if you will. So back to your point, it's going to be a fantastic evolution in the next few years of how all of this comes together, particularly in the large and mid-sized enterprise space.
So one of the things you touched on there is the interoperability. The metadata analysis piece of this is actually way more critical than just in metadata analysis of Salesforce. And I mean, there are very few, a staggeringly low number of people have got a good metadata dictionary. I mean, Elements obviously does that, but extending it for all the metadata and the interdependencies between agents becomes even more important. And let me just give you the example. So you build a workflow. Great, you've got a workflow. It's kicked off because of a screen flow, but actually we could use that in an agent. So you have an agent, a topic. The topic is the action calls that flow. But actually, there's another that topic gets reused in another agent. We got another top agent over there with a topic which also uses that flow. So we've now got to use that flow is now being used in 3, 4, 5 different places. If an admin goes, well, actually, the customers, my end user said, I need it changed because of that screen flow, and I just make a change, not realizing that flow is used by 3 or 4 other agents. What's going to happen? So in just the Salesforce world, if that flow is used by somebody else, it would break. Or the end user would go, it's not working, something happened. But in the agent world, will the agent just go, well, I'll work around that? If it's a customer facing, you might never know. So this whole idea of reuse of metadata and that metadata analysis is suddenly so much more important. And then also that documentation of, you've got to be a lot clearer about exactly how these things are used and why. I've always talked about AI is actually a mirror. It's a mirror on, showing you how well documented your business processes are. It's a mirror on how good your data quality and data governance is. It's a mirror on how well you've architected your systems and documented them on the metadata analysis. Because AI needs you to be a lot more accurate. It's actually forcing a bunch of disciplines that I think certainly in the Salesforce world, we've got away with kind of not doing very well. I mean, you kind of didn't document anything particularly well. It's not going to hurt you because an end user goes, yeah, I know that's not right, but I'll work around it. An agent won't do that. An agent will just do what an agent does. And I think the biggest lift in the Salesforce world is actually that having to be more accurate, having to be more disciplined, having to provide a lot more business analysis before we start building. I'm seeing that's probably the biggest pain point in people. And people going, oh, agents don't work. And that kind of, the mirror's there. You kind of aren't doing it properly. Agents work. So anyone who says Agentforce doesn't work is wrong. I don't think they work particularly well. If you do a good job in terms of the analysis, you can build great agents using Agentforce, GPT-5 or others. If you're not very good at defining what you do, oddly enough, you're not going to get a very good result, and the agent's going to be unreliable. And you go, oh, the agent doesn't work. No, look in the mirror. You're not doing a particularly good job. And I think that's quite a painful lesson for people at the moment.
True. So this is interesting. Let me pick on that a little bit. What is your recommendation to customers who want to get started, but also want to see, some sort of low-hanging fruit, like a shorter time to value? Because a lot of these conversations could be, hey, go do all of this foundational work first, but they are going, well, my C-level is breathing on my neck. I already delivered something in this quarter. So what's the communication you're having with your customers? What's your point of view?
Okay, so the first thing is the best way to get started is get started. And I know it sounds stupid, but the point is sitting and going, well, I'll watch is the wrong answer. So again, start fairly small. Pick, if it's not you, pick the person who's the evangelist, the person who seems to be loves AI, cares about it, who wants to make it work. We're looking for evangelists inside organizations who are going to take it forward. There's no point going, you're IT this, you go and do it. If they don't care about it, you're not going to get them fired up about it. So you need to find the evangelist. That's the first thing. Second thing is try and pick some use cases which are low complexity, low deployment risk, and then start experimenting and building them. And I would suggest building them means architect, design, build. The most important thing you're going to do in this is understand what the agent build life cycle looks like. The agent build lifecycle doesn't start with type instructions. It starts, as you said, with think about the use case, think about the user experience, think about what you need, design it. Ideally, use a visual approach for designing so you can engage people, and then build. Because the point of experimentation is not how quickly can you build an agent. The point is, can you build a robust life cycle that you can go around really quickly? Because when you get an agent live, you may go around that life cycle 10 times in a day because it's not working or it's in live or things have changed and you need to get around that life cycle. If you've hacked it together and you go, yeah, we did it, you're never going to be able to iterate quickly and you're going to be constantly out of control. So I think the experimentation is, yes, can I build agents, but can I build agents properly? And it doesn't have, we're building agents in days, a couple of days to build quite complex agents because we're going around this life cycle. The reason agents take a long time to deploy is not because they take a long time to build. You build it really quickly, but you can't get it to work. And then you spend the next 6 weeks, 3 weeks trying to convince senior management it's working or trying to get it to work reliably. And that it takes a long time to get to deployment. So that's first thing, get started. Second, find the evangelist. Third is go around that life cycle and build a robust life cycle for building agents. Even if it's quite a narrow scope, don't go, oh, this is easy, let's hack it together. Go around that life cycle properly and use a couple of low risk, low deployment risk examples to get started and prove the stuff works. And don't agonize about the technology going, oh, we've got to use this, we've got to use that. Use something which easy to buy, easy to get going. If it's ultimately it's not the right answer, the cost of changing platform is relatively low because it's all about the design and instructions. You can take instructions out of product X and put them into product Y. If ultimately in a year's time, the company decides they're going to standardize on a product you haven't used. So don't agonize about the platform because it's not about the platform. The real power is about the design.
For sure.
And getting the data right. And I guess, sorry, to finish off, the last point is You don't have to fix your entire org. You don't have to get all the data right. Just you got to get the stuff fixed for the area that you picked, and then build out from there.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think I feel the same way, particularly on the last point that you made, because fixing data is not a short term goal, right? It is a longer term. It requires discipline. It will take time, right? And if you work in a for profit organization, you have obligations to figure out how you're going to balance it, right?
But
For
it's
sure.
not just data quality. You got to fix data governance. There's no
Correct.
point saying we've cleaned all the data, but we've got interns pumping spreadsheets of unstructured data into the front end. You've got to go back and go, okay, let's go back to source and make sure we fix that data governance issue. Otherwise, you'll constantly be improving data quality, trying to improve data quality.
Absolutely, absolutely, for sure, right? And but my point is, like, you want to run these in parallel, right? Like the
Yeah.
days of like, hey, wait for another 2 years while we fix this are done, right? Like we've seen this with MDM projects, because I'm sure you've heard this before me, but like since the 90s, I've been hearing about people trying to do customer master and MDM and a lot of these. And the challenge has been like, if it takes you 2 to 3 years to do this, well, for publicly listed companies, that is eternity. Your senior management may have changed, their priorities have changed, they have to deal with different macroeconomic factors, and now they are readjusting allocation of capital for these things. So you want to do both. You want to be very conscientious of doing the right thing and constantly keep doing it as a discipline, but also figuring out, to your earlier point, of what are those low hanging fruits, low deployment risk things that you can do, so that the business, your stakeholders, start to see value, and they're not like, hey, I'm on this 3 year leap of faith.
I think if you're taking longer than 2 weeks to get an agent from idea into production, then you've got it wrong. And I know that's quite a bold claim, but I'll give you one example. So we took a look at one of our business processes, which is how a customer enters a case. We evaluate it, work out whether it's a bug or not, write up the bug request, send it through to our development team to get it fixed. Okay. We were taking 26 days on average to go through that cycle. Way too long. And also, over half of the bugs weren't getting fixed because they were in the constant, well, I need more information piece. Okay. We built an agent. It took less than a week to build. So actually we built two agents. We built a conversational agent and we built an AI workflow agent, which are back to a point earlier you made, which is there are different types of agent. So the first one was the case agent. So it would take the case in. We have a 50-page document which explains the different case types, what information is required, and so on. Obviously, our support team, they never read all 50 pages every single time. An agent does, though. So what happened was the support team were going, oh, I think I've got enough information, passing it through to the development team. What happens is the agent looks at the case and it looks at the 50-page document and it goes, based on what I've read here, these are the other questions that I need answered from the customer before we can move forward. Fantastic. So suddenly it's already writing out the 3-4 things that are missing. So that was the first point. That was agent one. Agent two, this was an AI workflow. You hit a button and it went and looked at all the cases related to an item, read all the email trails, read all the notes. It then wrote up the bug request in the format that our development team liked and wanted. Okay, so those two things combined took less than a week to write. I need to try to remember the numbers. We went from 23 days to close to 5.75 days on average. We went from 50% bugs fixed to 100% bugs fixed. We went from data quality of 0.9 out of 10 to 8 out of 10. And then there was the unmeasurable thing, which is our head of development just went, it was just an emotional time suck. I hated the fact that we weren't doing a good job because the specs coming in weren't right, and we talked to the support team and they couldn't fix it, and it was just horrible. So there was a whole emotional thing associated with it as well. But in 7 days of work, we got those changes, and those changes kicked in under 4 weeks.
So it's
So
interesting. Yeah,
that's the sort of numbers we should be looking at. If you go, oh, it's taking us 6 weeks to build an agent and it takes 3 months to get it deployed, you're doing it wrong. And I think that's what we need to get to, which is this is about narrow, fast. I don't want to use the word agile, but it's actually about a well understood process going through it quickly. I think you can do that with the platforms out there now. That should be the expectation.
for sure. And I think the OpenAI did that in dev days, where they created something in a matter of minutes. And I thought, to me, I was like, well, that is the wake up call that every large organization needs to see, every technologist needs to strive for. Like, even we look at our implementation today, it's typically, 1 to 3 weeks, right? Again, it's
Okay.
more than one because you don't have requirements, you don't have a lot of underlying things. We ship with 20 predefined, prompt/agents, mostly because like that customer 360 deal coach, a lot of those kind of things, because those are sort of very standard requirements,
Yes.
right? But to your point, which I agree with, one, there is this whole not resurgence, surge of these new capabilities, and that at all levels, right? Whether you want something as sophisticated as a MuleSoft, or you want something as an NA10 or Zapier or Workato or something, like there is so many options of kind of very quickly weaving together things, which in the past used to take a lot of time, right? And the second part of this is even tools like Jira and Linear, they have their own built-in agentic framework. In fact, I have Chris Pearson, I think next week, he's going to talk a lot about this stuff. They're doing very similar things to what you described, basically just with Jira, where you have some basic requirements and you're generating out user stories, you're generating test scripts. There's a lot of automation that's happening. And I think if you are in tech right now, particularly if you're an internal ID of an organization, you have to question your own timelines and say exactly what you said. Like, why is it so long? Like, why does it take us so long? Our testing today takes 3 weeks, which is when we use like Copado robotic testing. We run like 500-600 automated regression tests, and still takes us that long. And we're like, why does it take that long? The expectation now is a week, right? If that, like, it should be so much of automation driving it. You still want humans involved. We still want to do things that align with our organizational value, brand value, with the humanity of the businesses we are in. But at the same time, you want to bring so much more automation because it's become more affordable than it has ever been in terms of time, money, effort, all of it.
But it's all. But I think the other thing about is the cost of these platforms. I mean, how much is GPT-5? Like $50 a month, $30 a month? What?
$30 per month per user.
Look, there we go. I mean, that's an affordable level. I mean, AI has done to SaaS software what Spotify did to music and what like robotic automation did to manufacturing 40 years ago. It's driving down the price, but it's also giving the accessibility to more people that you can go and do this stuff. And if we think about careers for a moment, the career that's actually going to be in greatest demand is the business analyst architect. This is all about requirement. The technology is becoming easier and easier.
Correct.
It's all about how you architect it. It's all about how you understand the requirements and get those documented. And all that's happening is now, AI, even if you think about vibe coding, I saw a blog post by, I think, the product manager for vibe coding, who said, all you need to do is give it a detailed specification. That's quite like all you need to do as a detailed specification is quite a big ask. So that's the business analyst. That's combined with the architect who understands how this works. And we're moving further and further up the food chain all the time. So I think I'm very excited about where we can get to relatively quickly now, and there's room for all. Another, said, it's not going to be just one platform in organizations. There's room for multiple platforms, and it's affordable. Is the point?
Absolutely, and I agree with you. I think I'll expand that slightly more. What you talked about, business and analyst and slash architect. I think because of the convergence of so many of these things and the sort of the constant lowering of the entry barriers, now it's more important than ever to be at the intersection, right? If you're a technologist, learn enough about the business and business process. If you're a BA, learn enough about the technology so you're not coming in and going, yeah, I don't do that. I just write a spec, but I don't do that, right? Because that whole level of entry barrier is so lower. It's you don't have to learn C++ or Java to write these things, right? You're literally just dragging, dropping, and weaving them together, right? What we are doing is you're writing prompts in plain English, right? What you're doing with elements is you don't need to be some person with like 10 years of development experience to or business analyst experience to do this. You want to assimilate domain knowledge, you want to understand processes, you want to understand data. I think it's just in general you want to be a more well aware guy, or a well aware person in your business.
Yeah, and I think you made the point there about domain expertise. So you can no longer say, oh, I know Salesforce. That's what does that even mean? Or I know AI. It's like saying I know electricity. It's like, okay, so what? It's like I'm an expert. I know CPQ in the automotive industry. I mean, the whole way CPQ, if you're going to configure a car, that's very different from I'm in the high-tech industry or semiconductor industry and CPQ. So it's about specific domain expertise, and that's back to. And I think your point's well made about you can't sit there and go, I don't know technology. You've got to. I mean, I'm not a coder. I'm a business analyst at heart, but I can build agents, and I can think about how you stitch things together. So yeah, you shouldn't be frightened of that. You need to lean into that. And again, for tech, if you're deep into technology, you've got to understand more about the business or the industry you're in. Otherwise, you're not going to have a conversation. You can't have a proper conversation with the business about what they're trying to do. I mean, it's a worrying time if you don't do that. It's an amazing time if you do get engaged. I mean, it's the things that we're now seeing, what you can now do, and how quickly companies are changing. Feels very unsettling, but it's also quite exciting if you're on the right side of it.
Absolutely, very well said. I know, Ian, this was supposed to be 30 minutes. We went for an hour.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
It was so enjoyable that I just wanted to hear more from what you had to say. Always a pleasure. I think we should definitely do one of these again, and I'll reach out to you outside of this as well. We've not had a chance to sync up.
Yeah, perfect. Again, if I'm sure if there are comments that we get back from either the recording or people are listening, then give us some comments and thoughts about where we want to take discussion next, or who else we should be getting involved in. That's it. Again, thank you for inviting me. It's been really fun morning actually having a chat.
Likewise. Have a great day, Ian, and thanks everyone for signing in.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Bye.